Hello and welcome to the Corporate Secretary Yearbook. In this video series, we're talking to nominees for the Corporate Governance Awards. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Conor Kuritek, Chief Corporate Counsel and Assistant Corporate Secretary with Marsh & McLennan Companies. And he's here to talk about the firm's nomination in the Best Global Entity Management category. Welcome, Conor. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, Ben, and thank you to Corporate Secretary Magazine for having this as the first ever Global Entity Management Award. So it shines a light really on the importance of this in our field.
It was about time. So by way of background, in April 2019, Marsh & McLennan acquired Jardine, Lloyd Thompson, JLT, which was the biggest acquisition in the company's history. And in doing so, increased the number of legal entities that, from around 600 to almost 900. And over the past year, Conor and his colleagues have managed to integrate more than 100 legal entities, with around 70 integration plans taking place in almost 40 countries. Quite a lot to get through. So just a starting point, I mean, what were like some of the main challenges that you faced getting through that kind of whole sort of program of work, and particularly given the pandemic, obviously puts people working remotely. So what are some of the key challenges you faced, and how did you try to get past those?
Sure. The question about the pandemic is a great segue into it, but it was an extreme priority for our company to complete these integrations as quickly as possible. We said from day one that we wanted to be one organization. We wanted to run as one organization on our principles, on our governance documents, but not just from a governance perspective, from a controllership perspective, from an accounting perspective, making sure we were all on the same ledger and really one global organization. So in terms of the biggest challenges, it's really just coordinating with it's not just a legal exercise. We had to involve tax, treasury, controllership, IR, comms in certain respects, licensing, compliance. It really took the entire organization to put this together. And what we found really important at the outset was to get the governance behind the structure of how we were going to proceed in each of these jurisdictions right in the beginning. Because if we had just gone into it haphazardly, there would have been a disconnect between each of the jurisdictions and how we accomplished it. So we set up a guiding principles right at the outset that every jurisdiction would follow, and that were sort of bright lines that we had to proceed this way. And we did not give the option for jurisdictions to opt out of that. We really wanted to have one standardized way of integrating our company, because that is what is important from a cultural perspective at MMC.
Mm-hmm. Wow, sorry, go ahead, please.
And then the pandemic rolled around, of course, which luckily we had gotten about 70% way through of this global exercise before the pandemic started. And I had mentioned this a little bit early, but, and I think this is going to be the theme of our conversation here, generally when we talk about the pandemic, but technology is so important when it comes to legal entity management. We were in a very fortunate place when we started off this exercise, that even before the pandemic, we had said we want everything to be electronic. We want all documents in our legal entity management system to be up to date. We want it scrubbed, because before we went into this exercise of really rejiggering our entire organization, we had to make sure the data was correct. If the data is incorrect, you're going to have an inaccurate structure moving forward. So luckily, when the pandemic hit, we were in a great situation to not miss a beat, essentially. And we found that because of the technology and our investments into our legal entity management system from a digital perspective, we were able to keep going and accomplish the rest of the integrations in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges, I imagine, is getting hold of regulators in different jurisdictions, and obviously they were operating with their own restrictions. How did you sort of try and manage that?
Absolutely. And as soon as the pandemic hit, we actually went out and did a survey of each of the jurisdictions where where approvals were outstanding, to see how we would be affected. And as you said, it was extremely different by jurisdiction. Originally in Asia, they started out saying that they were going to be slow, but then as we saw as the pandemic progressed, the Asian countries actually were able to get back to normal quite quickly. So I think one of the things we said at the outfront is we have to be realistic, and we had to be flexible with our timelines and make the prioritizations about which countries could and could not progress on the timeline. And we had to get the backing of management in order to say, okay, this just isn't practical right now. But I did find generally that the regulators, we worked with them. We had to do some video calls that it was clear that neither of us were used to doing to explain the submissions. Things were slower, little things like just getting wet signatures in some jurisdictions that, or notarizations where they just still require them despite what was going on. It was a challenge, but we really took it in a way that we just required flexibility. As we still see in the pandemic, it's not over, it's legal entity management. Just, you have to be flexible as the macroeconomic and the global situation changes day to day.
Very much so. I mean, you talked about technology and how important that is, and I know it's something that you guys are focusing on. And you've also talking about the legal entity database has been something that you have been focusing on and giving that a sort of higher priority within the company. Could you talk us a little bit about how you've done that with the database, and how generally you sort of see technology as having played like a helpful role in what you've achieved over the last year or so?
Yeah, exactly. Technology is essential for our successes with legal entity management, especially for a global company of our size, where we operate in 130 countries. And as you said, we're approaching 900 legal entities. We made the decision early on. We saw that we had a segregated legal entity management system going a couple years back, where the local teams we would rely on them and wish them well and hope that they were just updating the information to our central database, and just wish that they did it correctly. We would send out some reminders every now and then, but what we saw eventually was that we were a conglomerate, right, with 4 different businesses in Marsh & McLennan, and some businesses were doing it, some weren't, and that just doesn't work when you're trying to structure on a global level. So we made sure very early on that we were able to consolidate and get all the information in the center. We specifically made the investment to hire someone to lead this from the center. That was a position we didn't have before. And we really had to get the backing of management to explain to them why it was essential for a local business leader in France, for example, to say why this affects the company at the global level, why his information or her information needs to be implemented on time and updated on time. And what we did, we really sat down with management and went by country, I called it a goodwill tour, explaining to them the benefits of global entity management and how it actually does affect the bottom line. I think especially during COVID, as we've seen, companies have liquidity problems. It's essential to have dividends flow up in a timely manner. It's essential to know from a tax perspective which countries are paying tax in what jurisdiction. And what we were able to successfully articulate was just the investment early on may be money and may be seen that global entity management is a cost center, but the benefits and dividends that pays out to the corporation and its bottom line ultimately far outweigh those investments in technology in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I mean, it just finally, is there anything else that you'd like to highlight from the year, and obviously getting through this tremendous workload that you think that you were particularly sort of proud of, or you thought was a particular challenge?
I'm particularly proud of the team. As I said, we made an investment into hiring a specific individual to run this on a global level. And we took and sort of co-opted others from within our governance structure, our corporate secretaries, to sort of make this a full-time role. We said this cannot be a side of the desk type of transaction. It will never get done, or it won't get done efficiently. So the challenge is, as I said to start out, the coordination between all these different stakeholders. But just I can't emphasize enough how having a dedicated team to this is really essential in building who can build that infrastructure to implement it moving forward.
Okay. Well, Connor, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on some amazing work done this year. And thank you again.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks.